Okay. Welcome to tonight's Parsha shiur on Parsha Tetzei. Parsha Tetzei has a lot of mitzvot in it. I looked up the number and now I've promptly forgotten. I think 74. Um, and Rav Tabori chose a wonderful one. I did not choose that one because I really wanted to learn my favorite Rashi with all of us. And we'll learn the Rashi. I'm thinking we might do some Rashi next year. I'm still thinking about next year's class, but if you have thoughts, please let me know. Um, and I sort of fell down the rabbit hole of a sort of odd topic, which is the halachot of Nivul HaMeit, what it means to desecrate or to hopefully avoid desecrating a person after they've died. So. I think what we'll do, let's look at the psukim and learn the Rashi, since that's why we're here in this mitzvah, and then we'll look at how the mitzvah gets unpacked by different people, and we'll learn a little bit about a few of the more contemporary poskim, sort of being a general category, starting in the 1700s. Okay, let me share my screen. Okay. So in our parsha, we have an uncomfortable few psukim here, where we're talking about a person who has committed some kind of capital crime. So I guess I will start by saying, right, whatever we think of capital crimes and whether they even should exist today, this is like the world of the Torah, certainly the world of many of the rabbis, generations of rabbis. And so that's where we are. So, v'chi yichya v'ish chet mishpat mavet, right? A man is guilty or a woman is guilty of, maybe a woman, as the Gemara goes into, but we will not. Someone commits a capital crime and is put to death, v'humat, v'talita oto al ha'etz, and you impale him on a stake or on a tree. So again, this is a very uncomfortable scenario, right? Someone has committed some kind of crime for which they were hanged and left on a tree. But the pasuk goes on to tell us, "Lo talin nivlato al ha'etz, ki kavor tikrivenu bayom hahu." Don't leave the corpse on the stake overnight, but you must actually bury him on that very same day. Ki
Could
kilad Elokim talui. Hello, Tamar.
hi. I'm puzzling over why they mention impaling him on a stake when the Hebrew says he was hung from a tree.
It's very strange. I don't know why. I can look. It is from Sepharia. I will admit that the first two you'll notice they're backwards, sort of the way that we do shirim today. These are from a much older class. Hello, Tamar and Jerry. Hello, Judith. I was saying that this is one of my favorite Rashis, which is why I abandoned. I'm pulling up the source too, which is why I abandoned Rav Tabori's mitzvah this week because I wanted to learn these psukim. And so this is from an older source sheet, the very beginning. Hmm. It's very interesting. So right now, the Sepharia English translations translates it not as impale him, but oh, there's something kind of weird about the. So impale his body on a stake is from the revised JPS 2023 translation. It also is from the Contemporary Torah JPS 2006. Okay, so the Shotkin Bible, which is Everett Fox, Professor Everett Fox, does translate it as you hang him on a wooden stake. So al ha'etz must mean like on the wooden beam, sort of like the way like Haman's, that's why I think it's not literally a tree. You're not picturing a tree with a branch where you hang the person. But yes, hang does seem to be the Koran Tanakh translates it as hang him on a tree. They translate it quite directly. Um, I don't know why JPS ended up with that translation. I will try to look into it. But I agree with you. I would say the sort of direct translation is vatalita oto al ha'etz is you hanged him on a tree. Or perhaps you hanged him on a wooden beam that comes from a tree, sort of like more generically. Um, However, he is on the tree, you shouldn't leave him there overnight. You should bury him on that same day. Um, Ki kilata Elokim talui. Because this impaled body is an affront to Hashem. V'lo titmei et admatecha asher Hashem Elokecha noten lecha nachala. And you shall not defile the land that Hashem has given you to possess. So Rashi is struck by this language of kilalta Elokim talui. Why is it a degradation, right? Why is it an affront to Hashem to leave this person hanging on the tree, right? Assuming that Rashi is not upset about the capital crime and capital punishment, um, he's wondering what makes this so particularly offensive, and so he tells us a very powerful midrash. He brings it from Sanhedrin. Sanhedrin brings it from the Sifrei. It's a very old midrash. And he says, Zilzul shel melechu. This is a degradation of the divine king, but of a king. She'adam asui bidmut dayokano. That people are made in God's image. V'Yisrael hem banav. And Bnei Israel are his children, or God's children. So, amashal, lishnei achim te'omim. Two identical twin brothers. Shahayu domim zelazeh. Echad na'aseh melech v'echad nitpas lilistiut v'nitla. One of the brothers has a very good life and he becomes king, and the other brother falls on much harder times and is arrested for robbery and is hanged. Kol hara'eoto omer hamelech talui. There is a fear, right, that with twins, if one brother is hanged, you might pass by and say, "Oh my goodness, the king has been hanged," as opposed to the robber has been hanged. Kol klala shebimikra lashon hakel v'zilzul. Whenever the term klala appears, it is used derisively or in a despairing manner, and it gives a citation. And so what Rashi is saying, right, is that who is the identical brother or twin sibling of God? It is anyone in Bnei Israel, whether they become a king or whether they become a robber, right? Whether they are someone who is hanged for a capital offense or not. And so there is a fear that if we leave that person hanging on the tree overnight, that we will mistake that person for God, and we will say, "Oh, God is hanging on that tree." It's kind of a wild idea, right? It's like bringing an argument to its furthest, most extreme conclusion, to sort of take that quite so literally, right? That we are the twin sibling of God in such a way that someone would be actually confused if they saw a robber hanging on a tree overnight to think that it was God. Right? We know that I don't think the rabbis of Sanhedrin or the Sifrei or Rashi actually think that's true, but they're making a really powerful claim about what it means to be created in God's image. And even if we need to have capital punishment, how far do we go to protect the dignity of that person, even in their death? Because we are all created in God's image. I think it's a really powerful and beautiful midrash. Um, and so this is where I started because I really wanted to do this Rashi. And I thought, well, surely there must be some halacha about, when you take someone down from a tree or what have you. But interestingly, the Shulchan Aruch that picks up, and the Rambam, the Sefer HaMitzvot, that picks up on this pasuk, takes us in a totally different direction. So the Rambam notes the idea that Nivul HaMeit is delaying the burial of a person, right? Whether it is someone who has just been hanged for his crime or whether it is a beloved family member, the mitzvah is about what did the pasuk say? The mitzvah is about ki kavor tikruvenu bayom hahu. Right? So the Rambam says, he shetzivanu likbor harugei beit din bayom shenahargu, right? That we are commanded to bury those killed by the court on the day they are killed, and brings our devarim and brings The Sifrei, who says ki kavor tikrivenu mitzvat aseh, right? This is an actual mitzvah aseh. V'hu hadim b'shar metim rotze lomar shenikbor kol matei Yisrael bayom mutar. And this is not just about someone who's been hanged by the court, but about anyone who dies, right? So in Israel, they take this much more literally than in most places in America, and people are buried on the day that they died. In America, we are um, more thoughtful or sort of maybe more careful about family members who need to come in for a funeral. And so sometimes funerals do get delayed by a day or two, depending on the circumstance. If we're waiting for someone to come from Israel or another country, and we need to wait for them. In Israel, I think like whoever is there for the most part, and they're buried on that very same day. And that is based on this. It's a mitzvah aseh that the burying someone quickly is very important. Um, okay. ולכן, המת שאין לו מי שיתעסק בקברותו, נקרא מת מצווה. And so, I don't know, some people have heard of this idea, right? That if there's someone passes away and there's no one left to bury them, they didn't have a family or whatever sad circumstance, they don't have a person who is taking care of them, they're called a mate mitzvah, that there's some kind of commandment around their death. כלומר, המת שמצווה על כל אדם לקרובו באמרו קבור תקרבנו. Because everyone has a commandment incumbent upon them to bury that person. So the Rambam understands this not just to be about criminals, but to be about one that we must bury people on the day on which they pass away. And the Shulchan Aruch also very explicitly, right, the same way that we don't leave the corpse of the person who was killed by the Beit Din overnight. Asur lahalin hamet ela im ken halinu lichvodo. That we can only, right, and this is sort of what we rely upon in America, that or in lots of places, that we should bury someone on that day, unless it's actually for the sake of their honor to leave them. And the reason might be lahavilo aron v'tachrichin, like maybe they couldn't get the coffin or the shrouds in which to bury a person, and so they were waiting for like a shipment to come overnight. Oh, mikononot, or they were waiting for the professional lamenting women, right? You used to hire women who would sort of wail loudly at the funeral, and if they couldn't get there early enough in the day, then you could wait. Oh, krovim, or to bring relatives who have to come. Ola hashmiya ayirot, or to assemble surrounding townships for his funeral, right? So if there is a very important person and you want to get lots of people to come in, or there's no one and you want a lamenting woman to come in, or you're waiting for someone who has to come from far away. Of course, at the time of the Shulchan Aruch, right, it wasn't as simple as hopping on an airplane. So it could take a few days or more to come in. And so what the Shulchan Aruch is saying is, listen, this is the mitzvah, but we should also be sensitive to the idea of kavod hametz. And if there's a reason to delay the funeral, then it's okay. So that is sort of the direction of the classical commentaries who explore this pasuk. But I found two other interesting rabbit holes to fall down. I was telling people I was on vacation at the beach, and I was sitting in my beach chair in this beautiful sunny location, looking at all of these halachot about viewing dead bodies and touching dead bodies. And my husband was like, "Put away the computer." So I brought us a lot of them, and we can always look at more of them. So just to review, so far we have this beautiful Rashi about how we are all created in Hashem's image, and that is why we don't leave bodies overnight. We have the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch obviously not touching that midrash, but saying that this is about all people, and we should be careful to bury our dead quickly, but also with great honor. Now we're going to diverge sharply to thinking about when and why we might want to do Nivul HaMeit in a slightly different way. It's all sort of tied to this foundation, but thinking about autopsies. So the responsa of the Noda B'Yehuda touches this in a big way. The Noda B'Yehuda was Rabbi Cheskel Landau. He was the chief rabbi of Prague in the 1700s. He was born in 1713 and passed away in 1793. So he had a lot of authority and a lot of responsibility in Prague. And he relays in his Teshuvot that the Chachmei Ha'ir asked a question: Im mutar lachtoch baguf hamet b'makom hazeh kedei lirot b'mufat shoresh hamakeh hazot kedei lehitlamed mizeh b'hinhagat harifoim mikan lahabo. The scholars asked if it was permissible to dissect the body of the dead in this place, to see the source of the wound, to derive knowledge for the behavior of doctors from now on. Right? So someone passes away from an illness in Prague, and the scholars come and say, Rabbi Landau, can we do a autopsy on this body to try to learn about this disease? We want to be able to understand it for medical practice from here on out. Aval benidun didan ein kan shum choleh hatzarich lazeh. But in this case that the scholars brought him, there's actually no current patient, right? So you have the person who passed away from the illness, and you have general medical query, but you don't have a sick person from the same illness standing in front of you. And what the Nota Yehuda is saying is that actually you need, like, let's say, chas v'shalom, this person dies from pancreatic cancer. You need another person with pancreatic cancer sitting in front of you needing to be cured in order to justify pushing off this Isur Torah, right? That we're not supposed to do Nivul HaMeit. We're not supposed to leave the body hanging. We're not supposed to desecrate the body in any way. And the Nota Yehuda says it's even asur for the Rifoei Ha'umot, other non-Jewish physicians, because we don't want to be lenient. Because what is he worried about? He's worried that we will start to do kol hametim kedei lilmod sidur averim hapnimim, that we just will want to know more about the inner workings of the body, and that we will so that they will know kadei sheyasu lasot refuatam l'hachayim. So he says it has to be so urgent that someone is actively dying in front of you of the same disease. Otherwise, just wanting to learn about the body, to learn how to cure people in the future is not enough to justify pushing off this Isra, which is so strong. I think it's interesting, right? Because I don't know, maybe Nelson knows like what autopsies were like in the 1700s, but he seems to be drawing the line at urgency of needing to know things in order to be Nivul HaMeit, to desecrate the dead. The Chatam Sofer, who is roughly contemporary, a little bit younger, born in 1762, died in 1839. He is a Hungarian rabbi. He responding to the Noda B'Yehuda says, "V'lefiza," according to the Noda B'Yehuda, "I haya lefanenu choleh sheyesh lo maka kiyotze ba, v'rotzim litnateach hamet halaz l'refuato shel zeh karov levadai demutar." Right? He says, okay, so obviously the Noda B'Yehuda is saying if there's a similar person in front of you dying of the same disease, then you can certainly allow this. However, in our case, what is the question, right? Is someone who wants to sell himself to the medical profession, limkor atzmo b'hachliyoto, while he's alive, to say, when I die, I will myself to the Department of Medicine of the Hungarian School of Medicine, so that they could dissect him to learn about the laws of medicine. Such an individual does not enter the class of saving a life at all. Begeder pikuach nefesh klal uklal, the klal. Right? So the Chassam Sofer seems to line himself up with the Noda B'Yehuda, saying if there's an immediate need, fine. If not, not okay. So now we're going to skip over to the Binyan Zion. This is Rabbi Jacob Ettlinger. 1798 to 1871. So like, right, we're taking sort of baby steps along the timeline here. He was a German rabbi. And he says in his Tshuvot, I was asked about a sick person with a terrible disease, and the doctors tried to cure him to no avail, for he died of his illness. And there is another sick person who has the same disease, right? Very similar question. And he goes on, is it permissible? The answer, a similar question was asked, right, by the Noda B'Yehuda. Only there, the case was that there was no sick person present, but the doctors wished to disfigure the corpse and cut it open in order that they should know how to find a cure should a sick person of this sort come before them. The main thing is what he writes, that this is not considered uncertain pikuach nefesh because there is no pikuach nefesh before us. And we are not concerned that perhaps such a case will come before us. According to this, in the question currently under discussion, when there is such a sick person and there is pikuach nefesh, it should be permissible according to the Gaon, the Noda B'Yehuda. In my humble opinion, however, this is not true. For I have already demonstrated elsewhere that Rashi maintains, based on the Gemara and Baba Kama, that one is forbidden to save himself with the money of another person. That one is forbidden to steal money from another person to save his own life. Right. So here, the Binyan Sion is saying, I don't even agree with the No W Yehuda. That even if there is an urgent case in front of me, one sort of right doesn't solve a wrong. That we may not ever disgrace and disfigure a corpse, right? Presumably, the deceased does not waive his disgrace, and so it is preferable to sit back and do nothing. I think it's a wild answer. I didn't have time to look into who Rabbi Edlinger was and sort of whether this was consistent. It seems like such a horrible thing to say that in order to maintain the dignity of our dead, we will absolve ourselves from figuring out how to save lives in the future, even an immediate future, seems very, very challenging to me. But that is his conclusion. That so strong is this mitzvah of Nivul HaMeit, of not desecrating the dead, that we should never do an autopsy on a dead person. And again, we're sort of moving into the field of modern medicine. It's a wild thing to me, but feels very important to him. Rav Shlomo Goren is going to swing wildly in the other direction. Rav Goren was born in Poland in 1917, and he died when he was in Israel as a monumental figure in 1994. And he brings up an interesting perspective. First of all, I just love the way that he.
Rabbanit,
Oh, yeah,
Rabbanit,
please, Rabbi Schwartz, go ahead.
is this the case of Rav Goren with what they call the Agranat case?
I don't know.
The Agranat case was, I remember my father and I discussing it in the Yom Kippur, must have been in the Yom Kippur War, where soldiers went behind enemy lines to bring back dead bodies, and there was a whole chakira vadachira of investigation whether or not that was a good thing to do to risk the lives of soldiers to
Hmm.
bring back the bodies. And I think it was Rav Goren who was behind saying, yes, they should go behind enemy lines for cover HaMeit to bring back soldiers. I think that was Rav Goren himself.
Interesting. I'll have to find that one. That would fit very nicely in this year. This is not
It was
that.
called the Agranat case.
Okay, I'm gonna look it up. Thank you. That's another beautiful direction to bring this mitzvah, right? Is that um just like how much are we willing to desecrate a dead body for the health of someone still alive? How much are we willing to risk someone still alive for the sake of the kavod of a dead body, right? It's almost the inverse case, I think, in some ways. And certainly, I know that there is a lot of discussion, right? Especially around most recently, all of those who had been taken into Gaza, right? How much were we willing to risk to get back people who we wanted just to provide an ultimate resting place in Israel for them and their families? Um, and that, in some ways, that case relies much more heavily, maybe, on our pasuk, right? Because it's literally about how long we leave someone out, right? As opposed to bringing them in to bury them. But no, this case is very directly related to this question of medical advance and science and Nivul HaMeit. And he talks about the two golden pipes. I did not look this up in Hebrew, but I love the way that rabbis talk about each other, right? And so Rav Goren very respectfully says, the Noda B'Yehuda and the Chatam Sofer, these two golden pipes, right, are pretty clear that you can only do Nivul HaMeit for Pikuach Nefesh when the sick person is before us, right? But he says, but in our case, right? And what is our case? And this is what I think is like so cool about halacha, and I got so deeply entrenched in this. Rabbi Landau and and the Chatam Sofer are writing in the 17 and 1800s, right? Pre-state of Israel, pre-autonomy. And here, Rav Goren has this enormous kavod to be writing in the 80s or 90s or even maybe the 60s or 70s, where he's thinking about what it means to have a state of Israel and what that implication has on halacha and how we have to think about what Nivul HaMeit is and what are the things we're balancing when we have a state of Israel and we are obliged. So he says, but in our case, when the state and the nation are responsible for the continuity of medical service in Israel and for the health of the people living in the country, and we know from the outset that in another few years we will need a certain number of doctors of high caliber in order to ensure the health of the people. And if we do not maintain medical schools, the country will be left without doctors. And it is clear to us that without autopsies performed in medical schools, we will not be able to produce doctors worthy of that name. This is called that the sick person is before us. It's a beautiful way of honoring the language of the Noda B'Yehuda and the Chassam Sofer while saying we have to do more. We cannot wait for an actual sick person to be before us because the Jewish state is responsible for the health of the population and must plan its services for the long term, right? With the sick person is before us is the whole state of the medical advances of the country. And Israel has made amazing medical advances in its 78 years, right? And so I think it's a beautiful way of looking at a realistic problem, right? We can't rely on doctors trained in other countries or non-Jewish doctors. We need to be able to have a state that has medical programs. And at the time that Rav Goren was writing, doing autopsies in medical school was an integral part of the learning. And so he found a way to sort of use the language of the Noda B'Yehuda and the Chatam Sofer while still advancing what we would be allowed to do. One more quick thought on this topic, which hopefully everyone is equally fascinated by. And this is the Nishmat Avraham. And the Nishmat Avraham is a medical halacha, a multi-volume reference work on medical halacha. It was written by Dr. Abraham. He lived from 1935 to 2020. He was a professor of medicine at Hebrew University Hadassah Medical School and the former director of medicine at Shaarei Tzedek Medical Center in Jerusalem. So he sort of in the same, in some ways, I think he fits into the same bucket as Rav Goren, right? He's trying to figure out how to balance halacha with the need for medical advancement in the state of Israel. And he says something else that is different. And I would love, Nelson, if you have any thoughts as a doctor here, what this means. I know you still think a lot about medical practice. He says something interesting. He says today, right? And I don't know when he wrote this, but let's say even in 2015 or 2010, right? After Rav Goren had passed away, even, right? Yes, Dr. Abraham S. Abraham, so maybe Steinberg is his middle name. He says that today we have scans and biopsies from a living patient, including places deep inside the body. The value of dissection has diminished in the study of medicine and um, I know, he really took the wind out of my sails. Okay, the value of dissection has diminished in the study of medicine and diagnosis of diseases to the point that the law has changed in the United States, and hospitals are no longer required to perform autopsies at all in order to be admitted as university hospitals. Similarly, there is no evidence that the quality of medicine in a hospital in which they do not perform autopsies is any less than that of another. So, I am not a medical expert, but it seems to me that what the Nishmat Avraham is saying is what Rav Goren said was true in 1985. But now it might no longer be true. And maybe we have enough medical advances that we can take a step back. And we can say Nivul HaMeit is more important because there are so many other ways to get what we need from the human body to sort of unlock the mysteries of the human body in a way where we can then again, I think it's just interesting to see how the rabbis are weighing the different factors and how different times in history the weights shift in different favors, both because of our obligation when we have the state of Israel, but also when medical advances make it so we might not need that thing anymore. Um, and we can go back to a deeper commitment to the desire not to have any Nivul HaMeit, any disgrace of the human body. And that on some level, I think it is because of this idea, right? Even though none of these rabbis talked about the midrash that Rashi brings us, that we're working so hard to protect the that spark of the divine in all of us, even after someone passes, even if they've committed a capital crime, or even if they've sold their body to the hospital for science, that we never want to lose sight of that divine image. So before I open up for conversation, I just want to look at one more fascinating question. This is from the Contemporary Halachic Problems Journal. And it is talking about the exhibit called Body Worlds. I don't know if it ever came to Chicago. It came to a lot of it. Oh, it came twice. It always causes a lot of that was cool, Judith. I don't know how you made those balloons come up. It always causes a lot of kerfuffle in the Jewish community. But there are these exhibitions displaying preserved skinless human corpses with well-defined muscles and tissues. 20 million viewers worldwide at the time of this publication. I don't know when that was. They've grossed over $200 million. I will admit that I was interested in going to see it, mostly because I was interested in this whole question when it came up. It came to New York when Will was in rabbinical school, so a long time ago, 10, 15 years ago. It was very expensive, so I didn't end up going as the wife of a rabbinical student. But lots of people went, lots of people spent a lot of money there. Um, and the bodies are dissected and skin and fat are removed. The bodies are then placed in a machine that replaces natural human fluids with soft chemical polymers. And then the corpses may be placed in seated or standing positions and displayed as doing lifelike things, such as holding a musical instrument or sitting astride a similarly preserved dead horse. A competing exhibition company, Premier Exhibitions. Oh, this is the one that I think came to New York. Bodies, the exhibition was shown at the South Street Seaport in New York City. Oh, in Chicago, Houston, Los Angeles. You can tell I only skimmed the beginning of this. And human rights activists are concerned that these commercial enterprises may be using the bodies of mentally ill people and executed prisoners. So I thought that was interesting. That's what jumped out to me, which is that right, where we are intent on protecting even those classes of people that we might not think are made in the divine image, and yet of course they are. And these human rights activists are, I don't know if they're religious people or not, but they certainly seem to care about that. Okay, putting the next sentence aside, as is well known, Jewish law not only forbids ignominious and undignified treatment of a corpse, but regards the human body as an object deserving of respect of the highest order because of its status as the earthly abode of a sacred soul. Right? I think that is a combination of all of the things we've read so far in one neat sentence. Accordingly, the body of the deceased must be accorded prompt and dignified burial, right? The journal is saying, like, how could we possibly allow this, right? We must bury people quickly. We must not take away the kavod of their bodies. This feels to be wrong, right? There is some controversy with regard to whether the prohibition against violating a corpse is limited to bodies of deceased Jews or whether it extends to non-Jewish corpses as well. I think this is an unfortunate question, but it is one that is very important, right? Which is maybe as the Rashi said, this is about how Bnei Israel are the banim of Hashem, and maybe non-Jewish people are not. I think, say what we will. The journal quotes our same midrashic parable and how uncomfortable it would be, right? Man is created in the image of God with the result that however that anthropomorphic term is to be understood, the human body reflects an aura of divinity. Just as the king who is dishonored in the indignity meted out to his twin, the deity is dishonored by the dishonor of the divine image associated with the human body. And I think that the journal goes on to say that this is not a good idea to go to these exhibits. Certainly for Kohanim, it's very tricky, but that there is something, even if it's it's to learn, right? Even if it's to learn something about science or the human body or muscles or whatever it is, that there's just something too over the top, especially in today's world where we can make incredible lifelike models of things. Um, and there's something just not appropriate about it, right? At least in the autopsy cases, there's like a question of the advancement of science, and this feels almost like people like eating popcorn while they see these bodies. So I thought that was a very interesting application of our midrash and of our mitzvah of the week. And I just wanted to finish with this idea by Rabbi Art Green. He talks about an old Hasidic story about Reb Nachman Kassover, a friend of the Baal Shem Tov. And Reb Nachman believed that the proper way to remain close to God was to constantly contemplate the four-letter name of God, to see the letters of God's name ever before him. He was a preacher, and when he looked out at his audience, he was able to see God's name in every face. But then times changed, and the preacher was forced to become a merchant in order to survive. What a sad state of the rabbinate. In the marketplace, with the rapid pace of all the buying and selling, he found it harder to always concentrate on the name of Hashem, right? When he was doing holy learning all day, it was much easier for him. Now that he's, just lost in the world of commerce, he sometimes forgets. So we are told that he hired a special assistant to follow him wherever he went. The person's only job was to be a reminder. Whenever he looked at his assistant's face, he would remember the name of God. Right? That I think is sort of in line with our midrash. But then Rabbi Green asks, what do you think the person, almost surely a man, looked like? Given the values of traditional Jewish society, he was probably not especially beautiful. Might he have been exceptionally tortured? Was it a tormented face that reminded the rabbi of God? Or was it something less dramatic? What in Yiddish might be called an Eitelkeit, maybe? A combination of gentleness, warmth, and nobility. We'll never
Beautiful.
know, of course. Maybe it was just an ordinary human face, another person made in God's image. But he was there to serve as a reminder, and that was quite enough. And I just think that idea, this is always a parsha we read in the middle of Elul, right? And just thinking about like what it would mean if every time we looked at our neighbor or our friend or the person we're sitting next to in shul's face, that we saw the divine reflection of that face. How beautiful would our Ben Adam L'Chavero Tshuva be, right? That we would be able to forgive, we would be able to accommodate. But I also wonder if every morning when you brushed your teeth and you looked in the mirror, you saw Hashem's divine spark in your own face, how much more powerful this teshuva process would be, right? That there's something incredibly empowering about that in our lifetime, right? And that's maybe like our Elul message is that, thinking about us as living human beings who are made in the divine image could help us do teshuva. And then how important this idea of mitzvah, right? Of taking care of those for whom they cannot advocate for themselves and they might not have anyone to take care of them, to ensure that we treat their bodies with respect while we wait to bury them, when we bury them, and to ensure that we don't sort of make a mockery of them, to balance all of our needs so that we place the kavod HaMeit very high on our list. So this was sort of like a frenetic exploration of so many different things. And as Rabbi Eliakim pointed out, we probably could have gone in this other interesting direction of rescuing those who have died in enemy lines. I think there are other really interesting ways of thinking about organ donors, a thousand other things. But this was sort of what I found in my exploration so far. And I'm so glad I got to share that Rashi with you guys. And I will stop sharing and talking and listen to you.
Well, so lots of stuff. Yeah, you put me on the spot about autopsies in hospitals, and I remember in 1960 when I entered medical school, and then later looking for a residency in a hospital. Hospitals were rated according to the percentage of autopsies obtained in that particular institution. The higher the autopsy, the demonstrated, the more commitment to looking for scientific knowledge to investigate the cause of the disease. Somebody died in the hospital. We never really knew for sure what was the cause of the death because there were no imaging technology like CAT scans and MRIs, etc., like we have today. Nowadays, when people die, they have been through so many tests and image studies that there is no doubt about the cause of death, except in very rare circumstances.
Mm.
So
Mhm.
I think slowly, because of this reason, the number of autopsies has been declining. So now
Hmm.
there is a knowledge, awareness that, as you said, that there is no more the requirement, the criteria that used to be autopsy rate, it doesn't exist anymore. So we don't pay
Hmm.
attention to that. Although there has been lots of traditionalists or people who are more wholesome
Hmm.
in the approach to medical education, medical development,
Hmm.
that you need to have that perception of the body, the real life, if you're going to do surgery, or even if you want to imagine how the body works. And I remember 5 years ago, I saw the exhibit, the body exhibit.
You did.
Yeah, well, it was at the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago.
Yeah,
Hmm.
twice.
What did
And
you think of it?
well, it was weird. Uh, I felt all the conflicts that you described about
Mhm.
not only as I was not an observant religious Jew. I didn't understand. I didn't know Jewish law like I know today. But even so, I had that queasy feeling in
Hmm.
my stomach. Uh, but now I don't know why today, my son, yesterday, my son was here with his children visiting from Baltimore, and they went to the Museum of Science and Industry. I asked them if they saw the exhibit. It wasn't there anymore. So
Hmm.
I presume it was removed because of the human rights activists were more prominent rather than any religious connotation. So
I
we live in the
imagine.
DEI time rather than religious times. But nowadays, you could artistically you could develop by looking at the body or the images that the reconstruct the anatomy with
Hmm.
artificially with plastic materials, and you will have the way the field of the body looks just like
Six.
that. But
Oh,
it's like so many other things. The real thing is always more significant, more
Hmm.
formative than the artificial
Hmm.
creations. So that's one thing.
Hmm.
And as far as the autopsies, people do complain that we need would be nice to have the experience of witnessing an autopsy and seeing the real anatomy in place.
Hmm.
So, but
Yeah. And if that would make you a better doctor, right? I wonder what the I forget what his moniker was. The Nishmat Abraham would say about that, right? Even if you can see inside, it doesn't replace that real experience.
yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
So my granddaughter, at an early age, knew she was going to go into medicine.
Okay.
In high school, between her first year and her second year, during the summer, she took a course at Rush Hospital downtown or
Hmm.
near downtown and performed an autopsy as part of her
Wow.
course at 14. And it was for teenagers. She wasn't the only teenager there.
Wow. Is she a doctor?
She's got a doctorate in nursing. She
Okay.
didn't want to be a doctor. No offense, Dr. Nelson, but she wanted to be a nurse. So she's got a doctorate in nursing now.
She's probably happier, more effective, and making more money than she would be as a doctor these days.
That's what her other grandfather told her, who's a doctor.
And she was perhaps put on that life-saving path, through
really?
but like I think it's easy to say high schoolers, like what, I don't know, should they really be touching a dead body? Is that respectful? But if it put her on her course to become a doctorate of nursing, I mean, what an amazing story.
She's coming to show for the high holidays, so you'll be able to see her.
Okay, cool.
I had three remarks,
Sure.
brief. One is my eye was caught by one of the commentaries that mentioned, you shouldn't be exploiting someone's body for knowledge-seeking autopsies,
Mm,
with the exception of people who were killed by the law, who were sentenced to
mm,
death. And what
mm-hmm,
was the other one? I think if you made arrangements in advance, that was okay.
mm-hmm. That's
But
right.
the people, prisoners and people given capital punishment caught my eye because of a fascinating conversation that erupted during the course of a Chabad JLI course
Okay.
in various kinds of medical issues. And the chapter was about um, uh, organ donation.
Hmm.
And it
That was
just
another
happened to
direction I
be
was thinking about
one of
going.
the people attending, the participants, had been the head of, or at least very actively involved in one of the major hospitals in Chicago, and in organ replacement. And he became um, he exposed a situation that he thought
Hmm.
was unethical because they were not following the rules about determining who would be next. So he mentioned during the course of his informing us about the backstories to all the machinations that go on behind the scenes with respect to organ donation, that in China, they think nothing of constraining prisoners to donate organs or using their bodies for organ donation. Of course, we were all shocked out of our minds.
Wow.
Um, but then, you wonder what happens here. I'm not sure
Hmm.
we
I,
know.
I wonder if today China is ruled by a communist ethics, which is totally different than what we
Yes,
were.
I'm sure that
Hmm.
I wonder if before the communist revolution, during the imperial times, when Confucianism and other Chinese traditional religions, Buddhism, were predominant, if they were being different. I think you may be reflecting just a materialistic, atheistic, communist.
Hmm.
no, there was just as much powerful authority there. Anyway, that's just an aside. A couple things about that exhibit of the German
Hmm.
mannequins. I didn't go to it, but I read reviews avidly in the two times that something like that came to Chicago, and it was, my understanding, it was uh, a traveling exhibit, so the time it was available at the Museum of Science and Industry was limited, even though it lasted for months. But the reviews and the journalistic descriptions always emphasized the hushed atmosphere. There was a kind of awe and really an atmosphere of sanctity about the place. Many people felt that they came away feeling deep respect for the human body and its miracles and whatnot. And the exhibit certainly differs from uh, artificial creation of this kind of thing, because you could see all the bumps and warts. You could see the internal organs and how they had been affected by disease or age or whatever.
Hmm.
You could see, what happened to these people, so to speak, from the inside out, which certainly was impressive for people who worry about their health and they
Hmm.
want to know what they're in for if they don't pay attention to their
Hmm.
health. The last thing I wanted to say is probably sometime soon after I retired, which was in 2004, my colleagues from the medical school took members of the Retired Professors Association at our university on an excursion to the medical school downtown to see a lecture, an introduction to the amazing new technology that was being developed. And it was this three-dimensional depiction through scans.
Hmm.
And we saw the, the beginnings of that illustrated in living color, three dimensions on the
Wow.
screen. And it was very awesome. And just to think that in, what is it, 25 years or so, that's just turned things around in the medical field.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
they of course, thought it would change medical education considerably, which apparently
Hmm.
it has.
It would be interesting to note if there becomes a swing back in the other direction, as Nelson's saying, that there's something just different about performing an autopsy
Yeah,
and whether schools do sort of swing back in that direction. I also think like you brought up another interesting thing to put on the balances, right? Which is the reverence for the body, right? If going to a show like that makes you, appreciative of Hashem's world and the things that Hashem is able to do to make our bodies right, how does that sort of factor in on the balance? I don't know. But I think it's one worth noting for sure.
yeah. And that reminded me of what a couple of our friends, co-congregants, said at a Limud presentation about starting up a Hevra Kedusha here in the
Hmm.
suburbs,
Hmm.
and their experience taking part in that. Now, both of them were
Hmm.
physicians, but uh, they and others I've met since who do that say it is definitely a spiritual experience, the washing of the body
Yeah.
in preparation for burial, and
Hmm.
that they find it, a profound religious experience.
Yeah.
I actually was thinking of signing up, but it
I
turns
think it's amazing. I
out
think
that
it's
people
sad
with
that it's
certain
one of,
medical conditions really are not,
hmm,
it's not appropriate to deal with the
it's not for
deceased.
everybody for sure. But I think it is one of those things that the modern Orthodox community still by and large outsources out of our own community, right? It's not often that members of like a modern Orthodox shul are part of a Chevra Kadisha. It's usually a sort of slightly more religious crowd, and it's a beautiful thing to do to join. They were thinking about starting one in one city in which my husband and I lived, and we went to the information course, to try to figure out would we like to go. And my husband, who was not at all squeamish about learning how to be a shochet at that time, was quite squeamish about the idea of doing this job, whereas I was totally enthralled with the idea of performing this mitzvah and could never imagine killing a chicken, right? So I guess it's all relative, but yes,
Rabbanit,
that's right. The opposite of Nivul HaMeit, the ultimate kavod HaMeit, to really take care of the body in such a respectful and loving way.
Rabbanit Yael.
Yeah.
A question formed itself in my mind. If one individual has power of attorney
Hmm.
over another person, do they by law have the right? Is it to agree to an autopsy, let's say, or dissection, whether by Jewish law or by secular law?
By
With power of a
secular law, yes.
pardon?
But a secular law, I think that is true. From
Yeah,
my
that's
chaplain
true.
days,
Yeah.
a family member of a deceased can always request an autopsy, if they desire one. By Jewish law, I don't know. I know that there are cases where sometimes the medical world wants to do an autopsy and a rabbi is asked to sort of step in and say, do we really need that? Let's just bury the body. But usually that is at the request of the loved ones who are left behind, meaning that, there is a strong, I think, feeling that autopsies are like not a good thing to do within halacha, which I would say generally they are not because of Nivul HaMeit. If there was a reason either to gain justice for that person, meaning if they died in a mysterious way, or if there was a fear of malpractice and you wanted to uncover, what had happened in the hospital, like those are reasonable reasons to want an autopsy, but not just to have it.
Curiosity.
Yeah, curiosity certainly not. And so sometimes rabbis do step in to sort of help steer away from an autopsy if possible. Um, But yes, certainly in the sort of regular world, the next of kin can request an autopsy. I guess it would be interesting to think about like if there was a fight between two next of kin and they went to the rabbi, right? Like, I not that that would like a Beit Din might say, listen, we really you shouldn't do an autopsy. So we side with right? Whereas the medical community might say this is your right and you're entitled to it. Autopsies are quite expensive, and at least in the hospital in which I worked in Michigan, unless the medical examiner wanted the autopsy, it was usually not covered. So sometimes family members would say they would want one, and I would say, I just want to make sure you understand that this might cost upward of $5,000. And then some family members were like, oh, well, maybe we'll just, negotiate our grief and curiosity in some other way. And some people said, no, I really want it. And then, that's they're allowed to make that choice.
Quick, I'll make a few points real quick.
Please.
When my aunt unfortunately was killed by hit and run in a very controversial case, um, so my mother was the first one that they took to the hospital to see the body, and then my aunt and my uncle. And that entire first several hours, they kept coming in and saying, "We've got to do an autopsy. We have to do an autopsy." And my mother and my aunt and my uncle kept saying, "No, it's against our religion." And then they kept saying, "Yeah, but there was a crime here. Since there was a crime involved of a hit and run, we have to." In the end, I don't think they did.
Yeah,
That's number one. Number two,
I
when
see that.
my when my mother passed away, it was a late Thursday night, and all the rabbis were there with me, Rabbi Matzliach and Rabbi Wolf, and they suggested we send my mother's body immediately to New York so that as soon as Shabbos was over, I could go with her body to Israel and she could be buried as quickly as possible.
Hmm.
And whether I was right or wrong, but I think I was right, I said no. My mother lived here for 99 years. Her family is here, her nephews, her nieces, her friends, her cousins, all her relatives. She deserves to have a funeral in her city before going to Israel. And I thought that was the greatest covet I made. As far as Rav Gorn, he was not the chief rabbi of the army at the time, but he was chief rabbi of Israel. And I remember my father saying as a balabas, dead is dead. Why risk a soldier? But I think Rav Goren felt that it's beyond the halacha or above the halacha the need to
Hmm.
give the covered hameis. And
Hmm.
as far as autopsies go, um, it depends on the case, as you said. And finally, um, oh, and I think it was Rav Tendler who once said in a speech that today we have so much knowledge, as Dr. Nelson said, from MRIs, from everything else, that there's much less reason for autopsies than there used to be.
Hmm. Yeah, Rabbi Tendler certainly understands medicine. I mean, an amazing resource in the field of halacha and medicine. I think your example of your mom, alav shalom, is beautiful, right? Meaning, just as the factors for the autopsies, there are so many factors about what kavod hameit is. When my father passed away, he passed away very close to Shavuos, and the rabbi of my parents' shul said he should be buried, right before Shavuos. And my sister totally, sort of like lost it in that moment and said, how could we not sit Shiva? It would be so disrespectful, right? And there was this hard moment. And now looking back as someone who has now gone through a rabbinic education, I can see sort of the binds he was in, right? He wanted to say, Al pi halacha, we really should bury him. And you can honor him in lots of ways, right? And you can have open hours of visiting without it being Shiva. In the end, we waited until after Shavuos. And I think that those factors are very important. Thinking about the kavod, how kavod is expressed after a person has passed is complicated and nuanced. And making sure that the right people are there for the funeral. My mother was on a plane to Israel, so I'm not even sure she would have gotten back in time for a funeral before Shavuos. It was my parents were divorced, so it was a little bit different, but it was important that she be there. Making sure that people have the opportunity to be there to mourn is very important. Um, and it's a hard decision. I think a lot of these issues exist on a continuum. It's not clear cut. It's not, a yes or a no. And that's what makes it so, I think, interesting, right? So sticky in halacha is having to figure out where the balance is, for all of these things. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, Judith.
With respect to disputes between the Jewish family and the medical community about how to handle treatment or autopsy. Um, there was another fascinating presentation at Lamud by a rabbi who was well known in the community as the one you turn to in the hospital for disputes like
Hmm.
this. And he had stories to tell. He shared with us his collection of quotes from the Torah that he would
Hmm.
exploit with creative interpretations as he followed what he considered his responsibility to help the family achieve the outcome that they desired
Hmm.
by persuading the physicians and the others involved that Jewish
Hmm.
law required such and such.
Hmm.
And it was very interesting, I have to say, um,
Hmm.
the situations that he described and the ways he found their way out of it that satisfied the physicians.
Hmm. Yeah, because I think all of these cases, even the medical cases, right, there's extraordinary emotion. Like it's a charged circumstance, right? The death of a convict, the death of a loved one, advancing medical science while being respectful of people's bodies, right? Deciding when to wait and when to rush a funeral. They're very, very hard because we don't make those decisions in calm, measured times. We make them in moments of grief and mourning, of confusion, and they're hard things to unpack. So thank you for allowing me to look at this sort of unusual mitzvah together. May we all live long lives ad Me'ah Esrim where we don't have to think about any of these questions. And may we all have people who give us honor when we are living and we are dead. And may we all really I think take that idea of being born in the divine image and dying in the divine image with us as we journey towards Rosh Hashanah. I look forward to learning together next week, and am thinking about what we'll learn in the coming year. So if you have thoughts or ideas, please feel free to let me know.
In,
Uh,
Thank you
in
very much.
Israel, it is a known thing after such a discussion of people saying, "Bon nikne dagim." Let's go buy fish because fish
hmm.
is a sign of life.
Yes, may we all enjoy a good herring or gefilte fish as we think about this class. Thank you, Rabbi Eliakim. What a beautiful note to end on. Wishing everyone a good week and an early Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.